Hello everyone, it's Deborah at Attic Lane, and today I'm here with a video showing you how I made 3 cards using a wonderful little stamp called Fab-BOO-lous Friends from My Favourite Things. I'm going to stamp out a range of these little images using Memento Tuxedo Black dye ink. The reason that I'm using this ink is because when later on I colour these images with Copic pens, the ink and the pen ink won't run in together, so the ink on the images will stay fixed in place. I'm stamping out some of the little mummies, although I don't actually end up using them in this particular card. Now these are the Copic pens that I'm using. I've got the numbers on the bottom of the screen there so that you can see. I'm not an expert at Copic colouring, so I'm starting out with the lightest shade, and then I'm adding succeeding darker shades all the way out to the edge of my little pumpkin. What I want to create is some lighter colour in the middle of the pumpkin so you can see those features a little bit more clearly, and then darker colours around the edge and just near the top so that it gives the impression of the pumpkin having a 3D shape. To blend all of these colours together, I'm going over all of them with the lightest colour. Once they're all coloured in, I'm using G07 green to colour in the little leaf bit, the stalk at the top. Now I'm going to colour my 3 mummies. Although I won't be using them in this particular card, I will use one of them in the second card that I make. Again, I'm starting with my lightest shade, a light grey, and I'm adding a darker grey just, as you can see, just in the sort of folds of the bandages around the little character. I've used this die from Tailored Expressions called Birch Tree Cutting Plate to cut some trees out of black card. And now I'm going to use the web from the stamp set, and I'm going to use a smoky grey ink, and I'm going to use clear embossing powder, and I'm just stamping that image onto those trees at the top of the trees quite randomly, and when it's heated you can see it gives a sort of a shimmer. You can just see the webs. And I've cut a piece of black card, and you can see that my birch trees have a little border around the black card base. So now I'm going to mask off that border because I want to put some colour onto the black base card, but I don't want it to interfere with my frame, my black frame around the outside of the card. I'm using Distress Oxide Faded Jeans to add colour to that background, and I'm spritzing it with some water. I'll let that sit for a little moment and then I'll take it away with some paper towel. And this is titanium white acrylic paint. I'm going to spritz a little water into that, mix it up, and I'm going to add some splashes of white onto my card base. Of course our first one is a bit of a splat, but I checked and it's hidden by the trees, so it was okay. From this piece of white card I'm going to cut out a big moon. It's going to sit in the top right of my card, and I'm just cutting it down to the shape and size that I want. I'm going to colour this with Zig Clean Colour brushes, and the 2 colours that I'm using are light grey and pale grey. I'm just adding random splodges to make it look a bit moony. And then I decided I needed a little bit of yellow. Spritz that with a little bit of water, and then I'll move the ink around a little bit so it looks nice and splodgy. And I'm not worrying too much about the detail of how this looks because it's going to be hidden behind the trees. And you can get an idea of how it will look when everything's glued down. Now the outside border of that die cut that I've used is very, very fine, so I'm using very thin foam strips in the centre. So where the trees hide the foam pads, that's where I can use them. You can see white cobwebs on there, that was an earlier experiment. So now when I remove the masking tape, you can see I've maintained a nice black border around my card, and when I layer my trees onto it, it gives a nice spooky effect, especially with that huge moon at the back of it. I'm taking 4 of my pumpkin characters and I'm just positioning them at the bottom of the trees. And to make it look as if they're further behind those trees than they actually are, the foam pads actually block them going right behind the trees, and that's why I've cut some of those down. I've stamped onto black card and white heat embossed the phrase "Hello Beautiful," and I'm just gluing that into position. And when I've done that, my card is complete. Moving on to card 2. I'm using a craft background card base for this and Distress Oxide ink in Spiced Marmalade, and I'm using 2 papers from the My Favourite Things paper pad, which is called Bundles of Blossoms Brights. So I've gone around the outside edge of my craft card with the Spiced Marmalade to give that a little bit more interest around the edges, and now I'm tearing down the paper. If you use a ruler and tear the paper towards you, that's when you get that really nice jagged edge. I've cut down a piece of green and another piece of orange as well, and I'm going to use Distress Oxide Black Soot to go around the outside of my craft card and also to go along the top of those ripped edges to make them look really, really spooky. When they're all layered up and I'm happy with the position, I'll glue them into place. They go over the outside of my card on both edges, but that's no problem, I'll just cut those down. I did get very covered in black ink while I was doing this. So now I've got a selection of my little characters, and I've coloured these with a range of pencils and inks, and I'm just trying to see what sort of positions I want them to adopt and where I want my greeting to go. I've got 2 pieces of twine, I've got a sort of an orangey straw colour, and then I've got a pale colour, and I'm going to wrap these up in a circle and then just secure them with a knot. So my first little ghost I'm going to glue flat onto the card, and the other characters I'm going to add foam pads to the back of those so that they are raised up a little bit. So that's my last little gravestone going in place. My greeting, once again, I've taken one of the greetings from the stamp set, it's Ghostly Greetings, and I've stamped it onto black card and I've white heat embossed it. I decided the card needed a little bit more just to complete it, so I've used one of the tiny little bats from the stamp set, and I'm using black memento ink just to stamp a few bats on the top there, and apologies, my head keeps getting in the way. I try and edit myself out, but I still manage to sneak in. And with that, my card is complete. For card 3, I'm going to colour in a selection of the little gravestones which I've stamped and cut out, and this is a piece of white self-adhesive paper, and I'm going to cut out a circle. My hole punch there, I was trying to let you see it but the light wouldn't let me. It's 1 3/4 inches round, and I'm going to do just some splodgy moon effects on this as well with a light grey and then with a pale yellow as well. The reason I'm using a sticker to do the moon is because I know there's going to be some dimension on my card and I don't want the moon to add too much dimension and raise it up. The sticker will allow me to position this moon completely flat. Plus I wanted to play with the self-adhesive paper. These are great little dies. These are from Craft Emotions and the set is called Branches. And this is the My Favourite Things dynamic set called Stitched Scallop Basic Edge, and I've cut 2 edges in black card, and I've also cut a black frame which sits nicely on top of my grey base card. You can see I've attached one of those black edges to the inside of my black frame, and now the second one I'm going to glue straight onto the base card, and that's where I will get a little bit of dimension. I've cut some strips from this sheet of white foam, and I'm going to use that instead of double-sided adhesive tape on the back of my my frame. I like using the craft foam. It's very versatile. You can cut it as narrow as you need it. You can cut it in blocks. It depends what it is that you want to add a 3D element to, and I find this very versatile. There's my little sticker moon, and I'm just tucking it in behind the hill on my base card. I'm using my quickie glue pen to glue up the back of the branches because they're quite intricate, and I'll stick them in place, and I'm going to cut them down so that they don't extend to the edge of my card, because when I put my black frame on top you can actually see some of the grey card, the base card, around the outside of the frame, so I don't want it to look as if anything's creeping outside of that frame. So now I'm going to take my little gravestones, and the reason I used different shades of grey to colour these in was so that they looked a little bit different. I didn't want them all to look the same. And I've positioned those in place, and I've glued them in place. And now I'm going to glue up the reverse of my frame, and I'm going to stick it over the top of everything else. I've reserved one gravestone, and I'll show you why in a moment. I've stamped up on black and white heat embossed the little sentiment, "A ghost hug for you." You can't feel it, but it's there. And I'll stick that in place, and then I'll add my gravestone just over the end of that sentiment, and then it will tie the whole image together with the sentiment. With all of the elements of my card now in place, I can see that in that background I want to add a little bit of something extra, and there is a tiny little bat in the stamp set, so I'm going to ink that up with plain black ink again, and I'm going to just add the bat in a few of those gaps I have on the base card. As always, thank you very much for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe or leave me a comment. I read each of your comments and I try and reply to all of them as well. And I will leave you with some close-ups of all of the cards that we've made today, along with a little bit of music. And don't have nightmares.